You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. The Iron Lady sings it. That makes it official. Welcome to the big show. We certainly appreciate you guys taking the time to spend with the Chris Voss Show, because Chris Voss Show is a fan that loves you but doesn't judge you. And that's the best kind of family there is. We love you, unless you're evil. Then we have some issues with you. But the rest of the time, we love you, and we bring you the most amazing minds, the most amazing, thoughtful people, the intellectuals, the brilliant folks, the people who write the books, the people who win the Pulitzer Prizes, they're the journalists, they're the White House presidential advisors, the billionaires, the CEOs, all the smart people, and then, of course, one dumb host. That came together right at the end. I tied that nicely. We have an amazing gentleman on the show, as always. When do we not have amazing authors on the show? He's the author of the newest book that came out August 12th, 2022. It's called Telling Your Story, Building Your Brand, a Personal and Professional Playbook by Henry Wong. He's going to be joining us on the show to talk about his amazing insights that can help you build your personal brand in his company View. Henry Wong is a brand strategist, creative director, designer, and writer. He is the president and brand strategist of View, a branding and content company he founded that focuses on impact companies. He is currently based in Toronto, and he has guided small upstarts and SMEs to 500-level companies. His roots span over 25 years of senior positions in the advertising industry, including being an executive VP, creative director for the global ad agency Saatchi & Saatchi. Since then, he has bought and sold boutique ad agencies and continues to counsel and advise brand organizations as well as individuals. His industry recognition includes awards from Creativity, Clio, and Marketing, among others. Welcome to the show, Henry. How are you?
Wonderful, especially after that intro. You really make me sound much better than I am.
I know. I've had people ask me, they're like, can you follow me around and introduce me anytime I walk into a room?
Especially with that voice. It's just amazing, soothing, and very authoritative. Thank you.
I should, if you have a wife and kids, you need me to authoritate when you're coming into the room. Hear ye, all stand and rise for father, and that sort of thing. Maybe.
I think that would be great anywhere but the bedroom, of course.
Oh, well, we can work on that. We'll talk later after the show. No, I'm just kidding. It's jokes, people. But yeah, that might be an we do a lot of OnlyFans callback jokes on the show because it makes such a great thing. So maybe that could be like my new OnlyFans project, my new OnlyFans channel. Announcing people. You're gonna do a play-by-play. I can just set up like the whole play-by-play, like the NFL. And now it looks like John is going to the second base there. And never mind. Anyway, your book, Telling Your Story, Building Your Brand. We're building an OnlyFans brand here, evidently. Tell us about the 30,000 overview of what's inside your new book.
It was really a book that culminates, I guess, my many years in business through, I guess, the last sort of lockdown during COVID. I was able to spend a lot of time capturing a lot of the methods that I use to exact a brand. So it's a step-by-step. It's a little bit of a self-help book. I found that there were quite a few people who approached me who unfortunately couldn't afford the fees that I charge. Not that I'm overly expensive, but the book gave it a great insight and a good play-by-play that allowed people to begin putting their brand together.
There you go. Telling your story and building your brand. I've heard conflicting reports online that, building your brand is important. That seems to have been going around for a long time. There's some people that are trying to, they call it unbranding or unmarketing and stuff or whatever, and they think that brands aren't quite as important. What's your take on that sort of noise that's going around?
I think a lot of people tend to interpret, they simply say, I have to work on my brand. And they think that means getting on social media, getting out there, building a presence, but it's much more than that. And for people I work with, it's really about centering on what makes you unique. What is your position in the market? Once you understand that, that's easy to tell the story, because the worst thing that happens is often we're at a networking event, for example, people go, "Hey, Henry, good to meet you. What do you do?" And what happens is they go into this long litany of their resume and they talk completely off topic, and you begin seeing people's eyes glaze over. So the idea behind this, of course, is to really focus on what makes you special. What is your story? And if it relates well to what the core offering is that you have, whether it's as a CEO or simply a supplier, then you've begun centering on making a connection. So story has always been important. Story has been a conduit to getting people to like you, of course.
Yeah. People should like me? That's important? Why?
I think so much of it really comes down to that, because if you begin comparing all the services out there, all the people out there, it's often that likability. Because if I asked you what is your favorite brand, and you may tout Nike, or you may tout, let's say, Apple, and I may drill a little bit deeper and ask you, well, why is that? And you might talk about the technology behind it, but ultimately it comes down to simply, I happen to like that brand, and I find that time and time again. So the likability is an important aspect of what your brand is all about.
Yeah, because you don't want to be a brand that everyone hates. That doesn't work out too well, from what I understand.
Or at least be a little bit less polarizing.
There you go. That's always good. Have you talked to Elon Musk? Anyway, the story. So do you help people on how to build that story and form that story as to what makes them unique? You hear great stories, like Apple and other brands. How do you figure that out? And I guess you help them in the book walk that through.
Yeah, so it really does follow the process that I've used for well over 25 years, whether it's a product or service or a person. And it's really trying to figure out what makes you truly unique. Every one of us has a unique origin story. And once you understand what it is that sets you apart from everybody else, you can then begin retracing those roots to the beginning. So I often use comic books or even superhero movies as an example. And then, as you recall, with your Peter Parker or Captain America, there's a little bit of an origin to you, because what it does is help you begin to connect with the person and empathize with their journey. So part of that is sharing elements of it so that you can share it with other people, so that they can begin identifying, empathizing, and hopefully connecting with you in a positive way. So that's really the first step, is to understand what your story is, and then find a way to shape it so that people can obviously accept it. Because I could go on forever talking about my background, but you're really not interested. So really what I want to do is get to the essence of what my story is all about.
There you go. And why do people find that the story is so important? Like, why is that important to people and consumers, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't fully understand the why, but I've analyzed a lot of studies, and it shows that we tend to gravitate more to stories than simply facts. And it's really I think we're genetically wired that way from the beginnings of hunter and gathering around the campfire, where we shared stories. It was a way of sharing experiences. And a real example is much more powerful than simply listing again all the attributes of why I'm great, or all the attributes of why this product is great.
Mm-hmm. And so stories, we always talk here about stories are the owner's manual to life. That's how people learn. That's how we kind of get through crises and issues, and how we realize that we're not alone in the universe. And that's how we entertain. But even then, even in entertainment, it's kind of learning. We're learning about characters and morals and ethics, and there's so much we learn from stories.
Absolutely, yeah. And you probably remember from the early days of when your parents sat you down before you went to bed once upon a time, and you were engaged. So that whole idea of sharing a story is super engaging and can connect you very well with your audience.
And I imagine the visualization nature of a story, because if you just bark facts at people, like, what do? We do the internet, 5,000 speed, upload, download. It's always on. It's really cool. You like it. People are like, what did he say? But if you tell a story about what the meaning is behind your brand and what it means, and sometimes they listen to your story and they go, so what is it that you do exactly?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there could be some disillusion in your story that doesn't communicate effectively.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So master storytellers know how to stay on target. They know how to stay connected with their audience, and they know the sort of the push points of it. I talk a little bit about in my book, and I did a lot of analysis of con artists, for example, and they're wonderful storytellers, and they're wonderful people in engaging you and pulling you in. And it's not that we want to follow and become evil like them, but there's something quite engaging about someone who has that gift of gab and that ability to be able to share something that hooks you in and suddenly find yourself opening up your wallet, opening up your checkbook. And that's the effectiveness of a good story. It's funny, if I could share it, and I've been in advertising for well over 25 years, so I have a little bit of a cynical approach when it comes to hearing pitches and hearing sales and that. And I remember one time, years ago, a woman knocked at my door. It was a rainy night, and I opened the door, and she said, I've just moved into the neighborhood, and unfortunately, I parked my car down the street, and it got towed away, and I was wondering if you could loan me $100 so I could get it out of the impound. And the ad guy in me goes, okay, you're conning me. And I said, you know what, I think I've heard this story before. And she simply smiled and then kind of like, okay, thank you, good night. But she knew the power of a story. She knew the idea that if she could connect with me and get my sympathy, then I would follow through to, in what marketing we call the call to action. Her call to action is give me $100.
Wow. The call to action is really important and everything else. What are some other aspects of your book we haven't talked about?
I think it's also really understanding who you are as a person. So there's a lot of exercises to help you go through that. And whether you do personality tests or you do Enneagrams or your astrology, it's really a composite of who you are. What I tend to do with a lot of brands and people is interview the people close to you, around you, your colleagues, your friends, and that forms a more composite, composed picture of you. Because if I simply asked you, Chris, tell me a little bit about yourself, I think you'd spin a wonderful tale of the background, but it's really only your perspective on it. So the idea is to be a little bit more objective. And what we do is, apply a lot of the marketing principles that I use to try to get to the essence of who you are. From there, I can then determine how you might be able to sit amongst all your competition. That's referred to as positioning. Once we work out that positioning, and we then determine what, ultimately is the uniqueness of that. And from that, there's a message that comes out of it. From that message now comes the rest of the story. So then do you begin to formulate the story? So too many people start right away with the story or right away to your point, the call to action, and don't get to the essence of what might make me special, what might make me connected with you in some way.
There you go. Tell us a little about yourself. People like to hear origin stories of our authors as well. How did you grow up? What influenced you? What made you get into the businesses that you're in and where you're at now?
I often try to work out that route, but I think like a lot of entrepreneurs, we often have a circuitous route to, where we are today because we've tried many things. But I think back on my early days and, my beginnings were really quite humble. I grew up in the back of a Chinese restaurant. Didn't speak a word of English. I was a new my parents were new immigrants. I was born here in Toronto, and they put me to work at a very early age. So they're peeling apples, peeling carrots, and that. When I became of age and I began learning English, and it became my, of course, adopted language, they put me to the front of the house where I took cash, I interacted with customers. So I was like that little short round character from the Indiana Jones movie, this fast-talking little kid. And I found by sharing stories, by really understanding all the different people who walk through, whether it was a truck driver or a family or a couple coming in for the evening, I found different ways to engage with them. And I think that really formed my ability to connect with people and tell stories. So years later, of course, that came in quite handy as I entered into the advertising world. And story is a key part of it because you look at any sort of commercial, a 30-second commercial that I used to write and produce, it really is just a mini story that we're trying to create.
There you go. So tell us about your company, View, and how does it work?
Well, View really, I started back in 2016. I'd gone through a number of different entities of partnerships on buying and selling. And the previous company, one of my early partners, unfortunately, had passed away. He had been suffering from Alzheimer's for a number of years. And at that point, I decided to take a little bit of a reset on the type of company and the type of clients I want to take on. So when I started View, it was really with the whole idea of only working with impact companies that want to make a difference in the world. So I thought at that time would be a quiet way to kind of slow down, begin to take on less business and that. And surprisingly, the opposite happened. More and more people came to me because they were very much aligned with what my mission was and what my purpose was in starting the company. So I often write about that in terms of understanding what your purpose is, whether you run a company or you as an individual, because once you begin to comprehend that, you can bring more people on side. You can bring the people on with the same vision, the same sort of goals that you have. And ultimately, it comes down to, I think you can't be everything to everybody, but you can be the right thing to the right people. So understanding who you are, I think, really begins to shape the client base that you have, or the type of followers that you really want, or the type of people you want to engage with.
Mm-hmm. So should CEOs and companies internal have a story? And yeah.
Yeah, very much. I mean, everybody has something that drives them to begin a company or to lead a company. Quite often, they may put on a little bit of a face, but when I peel back the layers, I find that there's often something that truly motivates them and excites them and gets them to, whether it's money or whether it's the mission of the company. There's often a reason for them to get up in the morning.
Yeah, I need to get that. I need to have I don't know if I have a mission or a story. Maybe I do. I don't know.
You probably do. I mean, you've been doing this for many, many years quite successfully, and you obviously enjoy it. You love engaging with people. And I think there's something about you as a person, and, we've only recently met, of course, but you seem to have a wonderful curiosity about you. And I think that's obviously what drives you and connects you well with people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. I really like people. And I kind of had, somewhere in my life, I began being a story collector like you were in the early days of your parents' restaurant. Stories became, watching people, understanding their motives, their belief systems, why they did things. That shaped me really very large early on. I was trying to survive my childhood and trying to understand why the world seemed really freaking crazy. And I'm still trying to figure it out. But no, I've learned to really like people because, number one, I'm sick of me. I've spent 56 years with me, and I'm tired of all my stories and my stupid shit. And so it's more interesting to engage with other people and listen to their stories. And, life is like this whole wilderness of mirrors. It's this whole journey that you go through. And there's, probably millions of different pathways and forks in the road and different things you do. And it's interesting to me to talk to people about the journey they took, why they took it, why they chose one fork in the road over another. I find it very interesting. I find people very interesting, what motivates them. I think I forget his name, King of the CNN radio guy. Don King?
Oh, Larry King?
Larry King. For some reason, I would stick to Don King with the fight promote. But Larry King, I heard him say one time, he goes, I like interviewing people because I'm really interested in them. He goes, when I go on a plane, I talk to people. When I go in an elevator, I talk to people. He goes, I'm always curious about people. I thought, that's really cool. You watch Anthony Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain on his show would, he would be openly curious about people from different cultures, different races, different parts of life, like religions, and
it makes such a huge difference, doesn't it, when you engage with people?
You break bread with them, and that's what we used to do in the old days. We would break bread with strangers. They would come to our house and we would break bread with them, even though they were strangers. And the exchange was we would feed them and house them, and they would tell us their stories of the road and life. They were kind of like our TV back then, because, we were just living in weird tribes out there in the middle of nowhere, and we hadn't invented electricity yet, evidently.
And those are real stories, which makes it even more salient and more connected to your own experience. But I think you're absolutely right. This whole idea of being curious is just a wonderful skill to have. I think I received one of the best compliments when I was reading a biography of myself, and it described Henry Wong as being very interested. And I thought, at first I thought it was a typo. Shouldn't say very interesting. But then I realized, no, they deliberately wrote it that way. And it made perfect sense because, like you, by nature, I'm just a curious person. And to me, I think that's far more of a better claim than saying I'm interesting, because I am truly interested in what other people do. And through that, I think that's what hopefully has made me, successful in my business career and being able to pull the best from people to be able to, again, serve that up, turn it into those wonderful stories that we put out for them.
I love that. I hope some people would say I'm interesting. I've caught people on Twitter saying, I really hate Chris Voss. He's really annoying. He talks too much and he's always blabbing. I hate that guy. And then the other person will be like, yeah, I hate him too. But I still follow him because I want to see what the car crash looks like. And, he does some weird things every now and then. And I'm like, cool. I mean, you can love me, hate me, but if you follow me, winning, ching. Yeah. And I would hope that I wouldn't be boring. I can be controversial. I mean, I don't try to be controversial for the sake of controversial, but sometimes, we can talk about stuff that, doesn't fit the form of woke principles of cancellation. Mm-hmm. But we can talk about real stuff in real life, and we can push those boundaries a little bit and try and, be real. And
but isn't that better? Yeah, don't you think that's better than trying to be everything to everybody? Yeah. And I think that's a problem often with, until recently, many politicians seem to follow that mode, which is I need to be as neutral as possible, as threatening, as conforming as possible, so I can appeal to as many people as possible. But that isn't always the case, and you really do need to stand for something, because ultimately, if you think about it, it's your own happiness. Being something that you're not can really lead to a major disconnect in who you are as a human being.
That or you just seem like you're a generic brand. Like we're just like a white box on the shelf. We're not trying to upset anybody with pictures or anything. Don't mind us. We're just sitting here doing our thing. And I don't know, maybe some people that's a story. I don't know.
No, I mean, for a lot of the products I've helped sell over the years, that's probably the worst death of possible, where you're so vanilla that nobody really wants you. You really do want to be something and be meaningful to people. And sometimes that means taking a bit of a stance and living to what you believe in, even though not everybody agrees with it.
Yeah. And that's why I order strawberry ice cream instead of vanilla, because screw that vanilla stuff.
No, say that isn't so.
No, I'm just teasing. I love vanilla bean, really good vanilla, like authentic vanilla stuff. That's really good. But yeah, and there's all sorts of great variations of that. In fact, now I'm getting hungry and thinking of vanilla bean ice cream. Let's see, where is it going to segue that?
You should do your show over food. Yeah, no,
I should.
Food, food. Yeah, I mean that's really why people like Anthony Bourdain have done very well, because much of his content was done over food, and food, like story, is just a wonderful conduit to opening up these conversations.
That's a good idea. I'd love to. I wish somebody would give me Anthony Bourdain's job. I'd love to do that. That would just be so fun. Except for the food poisoning every now and then you get when you travel internationally. That would not be fun. But there's the one guy that hot wings or whatever. He does some wings over food. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's right.
Although it's kind of masochistic, it's sadistic in some sort of way. It's like, let's make a movie star who's respectable melt down into a puddle of crying. It seems a bit much, but
it's a bit of a hook, and everybody's looking for that unique way to present their content. I mean, even Jerry Seinfeld, getting coffee with comedians in a car. Wonderful concept, right. But again, it's a little bit of a hook that gets people to pay attention.
I think we joked with somebody recently that we might do a show where we just eat together, but there'll be a lot of plate clinking, the silverware and people hang on. We talk with our mouthfuls half the time, so it might not be the greatest show. Lots of burping.
I think definitely. Definitely worth trying.
We'll call it the burping show, the digestive show. Anyway, so with brands, So as a CEO in a business, it's important to have a brand. There was another question I had, and it's lost somewhere in the ether, but it'll come back to me. And what do you find? What do you find most people get wrong with building their story and telling their brand story?
I think it's really getting into the weeds and not really understanding their audience. So often frame it this way. You really have a 3-second story, a 30-second story, and a 3-minute story. Many people start with a 3-minute story right from the beginning before they even have had a chance to engage people. So this is where you begin seeing people gloss over or they ignore all the text that you've written. So if you think of a 3-second story, it's really your headline, or in marketing and advertising, we use a very quick headline or something to catch people, to get them to pay attention. Hopefully I begin to lean forward after hearing that little bit of that element of what will hopefully be an engaging story. And that allows me to go a little bit further, and then telling you a little bit more, pulling you in, and then sharing the rest of it. So the mistake people often make is to get to the long form before they've had a chance to determine very shortly if this is the person who wants to engage with me or not.
Now, one of the things I see on your website, you teach and talk and help brands with brand experience. What does that mean?
Quite often people simply think of a brand as your logo or the story that I have often talked about, but the idea is to be able to live and breathe it. So the notion of having that brand experience means taking that story and using it in your social, using it as your biography, using it on your website, creating the ads and so forth. It all has to come back to that story essence, because that way all your pistons are firing in the same way. Otherwise, you have very disconnected pieces that don't really shape the ultimate picture of who you are as that brand.
There you go. Because we've talked about that a lot. I think it's in my book. You can't, if you put out PR statements of your morals and your ethics as a company, or your statement of who you are, and you don't live up to that, especially as a CEO, where you're just like, the CEO's a lying thief and he cheats and he's an awful person. So what is all this high-minded stuff that they put in the PRA mission statement? I think Disney's one of the people that, I think, don't they have a rule at their park that their employees are supposed to make sure that whatever the customer needs, they follow through with the brand or the experience of that Disney wants. They make sure they walk their talk. I think, is that true?
It really is that ultimate customer experience. And I think what you've pointed out is where many companies begin to fall apart. So while the CEO or the mission statement or really the picture of the company, it paints it in a certain way, but it's not delivered on a day-to-day basis. So that story really has to be embraced by everybody and truly understand it.
There you go.
So I see this, even with smaller companies, who really understand it, but they empower the employees to make the decision to do what it takes to make the customer happy, because that's our mission, to keep the customer happy. So we give you the authorization to do what it takes, whether it's to give them a refund or give them extra money or give them and it works so well because they believe in it and they lead that story and they help to further it much better than just a statement on a wall.
And it's amazing how they remember it. Like with my mortgage company, every now and then we'd have a loan officer who would screw something up, and they hadn't followed our rules of ask the customer what they want to accomplish and shut up and listen and write it down. This would be something stupid like the customer would want a 30-year mortgage or a 15-year mortgage, and the person default to do a 30 because a lot of people like 30s, and they get to closing and they're very unhappy, rightly. And so then the call would come to the president and CEO of my office. And of course, it would usually be introduced to me like, hey, Chris, there's a customer from closing on the line. They're very unhappy. Okay, put them on. The first thing I would do is ask them straight up, hi, this is Chris Voss, the CEO of the company. I understand there's a problem. How can we resolve this for you? And it would kind of throw them off balance because they were ready to just start screaming at me and trying to convince me that they needed help. And I would be like, what do we need to do to make you happy? How do we need to fix this? And right away they'd be like, oh, okay, well, here's the thing. And, sometimes they yell at me a little bit, and that's fine. I listen. But for the most part, I would, deal with their issue. Now, sometimes they would yell at me and they would give me a load full, and I deserved it, being the guy who's, the buck stops here. It's part of my gig. Sometimes you let people vent and you just go, okay, well, if you're done now, let's figure out how we can help you and we'll fix this thing up. And sometimes, we'd have to refund all the closing costs and the costs, and we'd have to, there's some times where I gave a client, $5,000 of what it was going to cost for the closing and all of our fees and stuff. And, but it would be more important to make them happy. And, they'd be like, you're so awful. We're never going to do business with your company again, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, great. But let's make you happy today. How can we fix this? We'll do the work, whatever it takes. And they would be like, okay, fine. And they would still be angry. Couldn't blame them. There were sometimes we bumbled some stuff up, and not often, thankfully. But
it happens, of course. Yeah.
It happens, It's not that it should, because some idiot employee usually. And
but let me ask you this, Chris, because I find this super interesting. Do you do it because you of the social media world that we live in, where we're driven by Google reviews, or are you driven really by doing what's right, that is your manner and the way you conduct yourself?
Doing what's right. And this was back in the day before social media with our brick and mortar companies.
Yeah.
So we didn't, there wasn't anybody who was going to be like, we're going to call you out online. And there wasn't any of that sort of stuff. We did it because it was right. And to me, I'm very into Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius and virtue. And there are certain elements of doing things that are right. And I would hope for repeat business. I would hope that, they wouldn't, I grew up in the Tom Peters commitment to excellence, that if, you offend a customer, he's going to tell 6 other people, and they're going to tell 6 other people, but still doing right by the customer was important to me. And
so what you've described, and I often talk about this, which is an authentic brand. So you can simply make the statement that, we'll do what is right and we're customer focused, but, you in the end show that there is something behind it, and people can believe in it. And that's just as important as the statement itself. And it's what I refer to as the reason to believe, which is your support statement. So if you make a claim like that, you need to be able to back that up. And by and large, you live and breathe it. So that's an authentic brand. It goes from the beginning to the end, and in terms of the way you conduct yourself.
Yeah, and don't argue with people. These systems people have nowadays, where a customer has to argue, yell, scream, go through 3 managers to get finally to somebody who goes, oh yeah, we'll just take care of that. That's bullshit. I hate that. And so the interesting thing about this story was, I would be, I'm like, okay, well, we pissed off that guy. He's never coming back again. You know who would always come back to us? Those people. They come back a year or 2 later for another refinance or another house they got. And what was funny was how they would come back. They would come back, and I would see them and be like, oh, shit, that dude told me, he's spending half an hour chewing my ear off about what a horrible person and company I was. And he said some really ugly things to me. I'm not sure I want.
And you think it's going to be a repeat experience.
Yeah. And they would come up and they'd be like, it was so great doing business with you. You were so wonderful. And I'm like, I don't remember being wonderful. But they would have turned the story around in their head. And they were like, you're so great. And, sometimes we did 5, 6 loans with people. Sometimes they were investors. And they would come back to us every time. And we just had to make that one hurdle and fix that one problem. And they would come back and they would just glow about us and brag about us. And I just the whole time I remember that initial conversation you had with me.
What you've described is another aspect, not to turn it back to the book per se, but there's a wonderful aspect to building your brand. And that's when you begin having advocates, people who actually tell your story for you, because you can scream it as loud as you can, but there's nothing more powerful, as you know, than a testimonial or a customer who has embraced everything that you stand for, because that is the success. That is the path to continued business, of course.
Yeah. And I think being authentic, geez, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Being authentic is really important in a brand. Walking the talk and talking the walk. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Because particularly in this day and age, it's very easy to out you or find what isn't authentic. But more importantly, as I said earlier, being authentic, I think, is a path to better happiness, because being something that you're not truly is a disconnect from what makes you, content in life.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Now, I noticed you have a podcast too. You want to plug in for that?
It's, as you've probably found, Chris, a podcast is just a wonderful medium by which you can share stories and connect with people. So often I will have people like yourself come on my show, and they interview me in the same sort of way, because they're looking for advice on their business or looking for elements that may shape their brand. So and that's really the focus of it. So to me, it's sort of a reverse podcast rather than me being the host. They're the host and I'm the guest.
That's kind of interesting. So they come on your podcast and they interview you.
Correct. They act as a host.
I should do that, because that's a whole lot more easier. Hosting is hard, man. It's hard. It's hard being the host. So I'm just gonna let people do that from here on out. They can be like, they can interview me, and I don't know how would they? I bet you have some great stories, and I'd love to grab some time just to maybe get to that and be your host at one point. That might be interesting. Although I'm not the best guest, though. The problem is if people mishandle me as a guest, I'll take over as host. And I do that on a lot of shows, because there's a lot of bad hosts. I'm sure you're good, but there's a lot of bad hosts out there. And if you manhandle me wrong, or you give me an in, I'll take over the show and I'll just run the show.
Well, how did you describe it earlier? Being a bit of a car crash? Maybe that might be entertaining in itself.
It's just when you're Carson and you're when you're Carson and I'm not saying I'm anywhere near those guys, but when you're so comfortable being a host, it's really hard to be a guest. I think Carson only guested a few times on Letterman and other places, but very rarely. And it's just weird, absolutely, because you sit there just critiquing your host, going, seriously, who gave you this job? But
or the other side of it, as we talked about earlier, there's something quite, the reason why we do a lot of this is that we're just curious people, and I think we'd rather be interested than interesting. So I think that's where you and I come from, and why it works out well that way.
Yeah, because I'm sick of me, as I mentioned before. Like, people are like, so what do you like? I don't know. There's a video on it somewhere, probably. Go have fun. But the other thing is I tend to upstage everyone. So if you've ever seen Carson or Letterman get upstaged, usually Carson, he gets upstaged by Jonathan Winters or Robin Williams.
The real masters, yeah.
That's kind of where I end up on shows. I just upstage and take over, and people are just like, it just becomes the Chris Voss Show, But, they let me, so I do it. So that's just how I roll. Moving on, final thoughts on your book. Pitch out to people on how to reach out to your agency and work with you. Tell us, what sort of companies out there, this goes on LinkedIn, of course, what sort of companies work with you? Do they need to be a certain level, mid-size, small, et cetera, et cetera?
No, really, I've helped young upstarts. I've helped very mature companies. It's typically companies that haven't quite figured out their story and are looking to really get to the next level or reach that next plateau of success. And quite often they haven't quite figured out how to exact their brand and distinguish themselves in the marketplace. But the most important thing, and the first sort of criteria really is, what sort of, for me personally anyway, it's to have a positive impact on society. How will you better the world? And I'm very happy to talk to people.
There you go. So how do they reach out to you and handshake with you or inquire more about your services? Here today, I just happen to be talking a little bit more about the book on my own personal website, henrywong.co. You'll find more about the book I put together, but also there's contact information. But often LinkedIn is the best way. I find that's a perfect way to engage and know who we are before we even begin talking. LinkedIn is just I love LinkedIn. It's just such an amazing site.
What's really funny? I read about sorry, I'm going offside for a second, but people have started using it as a dating site. It's hilarious because and if you think about it, it's a wonderful way to vet people right from the beginning before you get it, because you can't be any more truthful than you can be on LinkedIn compared to, let's say, Match.com or the other sites, of course.
Plus, chicks can figure out how much money you have in your title and stuff. I actually had a gal write me in my dating groups, and I guess she's interested, but she's like, where is there a profile of you that's better than Tinder and other things that you have profiles on? And I hate Tinder, but I tried it once, and so there's some residual sitting there. But I sent her my LinkedIn profile. Yeah, it's a dating site, I guess, now. And just stay tuned for lots of Snapchat pictures showing up on LinkedIn.
That may be the next evolution, or
Don't send dick pics through LinkedIn, people. Make it stop. Let's have one prominent, established, decent, professional social media site, please. Okay, there's enough sites for all that other garbage. So there you go. But yeah, it's such a great site. It's such a great place to meet professionals and network with individuals. We used to joke back in the day when there was just the triad of Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. We used to joke, Twitter is the bar, Facebook is your home, and LinkedIn is your business, your office. Don't put stupid bar stuff on your LinkedIn thing. But there you go. So thank you very much for coming on. Yeah.
Wonderful to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's been insightful and everything else, and I'm going to go figure out what my story is. That, or I'm just going to make up one and just, I don't know, make a new
Put it on Tinder, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to put it on Tinder. There you go. Yeah. You can have a story for dating. I'll use that on first dates. So thank you very much, Henry, for coming on. .coms as we go out, please, sir.
Take care.
There you go. No, give me your .com, your website.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, the other website would be viewbrand.com, VYOO brand.com, or henrywong.co, which is my personal site.
There you go. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1, TikTokity, all those crazy places on the internet. Stay safe. Be good to each other. And we'll see you next time.